common ethos, discipline, and shared values, honor beyond aid.
Come to the issues with me, Irbad Ibrahim. Throughout this week, there's been so much talk about a proposed $50 billion century bond that has been floated by His Excellency the President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. He's still in China, and there has been a lot of interpretation and analysis as to what that means for the economy of the Republic of Ghana. Today we look at the merits and demerits of such a robust economic move by His Excellency the President. And to help us with the discussion, we are in competent hands and competent company. To my immediate right, Dr. Ebenezer Ashley, an economist and a financial consultant. Sir, thank you so much for making time.
Thanks for having me.
And then Reverend Dr. Samuel Walanyo Mensah. He is a chartered economist and a lecturer at Wisconsin University. Sir,
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Ashley, I'll start with you.
All right, okay.
People are quite concerned that Ghana seems to be drifting to the east rather than the west, even though the Cold War is over. What is your reading?
Thank you very much. First, I'll say good afternoon to your cherished viewers. Ghana-China relations, as a matter of fact, it dates back to the early post-colonial era, that is during the days of the very first presidents of the Republic. As a matter of fact, the first president of this land, the late Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, at a point in time had to mobilize troops to China to help, in their unrest within the region, And so, if you look at Ghana's relationship with China, it did not start today. Save we have been going to the west because that is where, the economic paradigm actually shifted to. As I speak, there has been a refocus from the west towards the east, even though the west is still struggling to ensure that it has a firm grip over the trade relations. But as we speak, the country with the largest population in the world is China. The country with the largest industrialization drive is also China. What it means is that China remains the country with the large amount of goods, especially, even not with services, even though they also contend when it comes to services. They are the country with large number of goods available for sale. And so the question is, just as we adapt marketing strategies in our little companies here in Ghana, so it is that at the national level you adapt a marketing strategy that will help you sell your finished goods to the target market. So what China is doing is not surprising to some of us. It's a matter of making sure you capture those markets that could buy into the goods and services you produce and be able to have an edge over your other competitors in the industry. So the relationship is not so surprising to some of us, and I'm sure we'll come into the details. You realize in some cases, China even offers to provide certain assistance, not only to Ghana, but to other African countries. It is just a way of engaging in marketing. You are able to prepare food for sale. In some cases, you have sample of the food available for passers-by to taste and see, so that they can buy into the food, especially when you are not a well-established or well-known seller of that food. So if the person tastes and he or she develops strong taste and preference for food, what happens? He or she will refocus, especially when you have quality and then affordable price for your food. So it is a matter of competing with equally good competitors in the market to make sure that she has an edge over others. That's exactly what's happening.
That's quite a profound, intro. Dr. Walanyo, what makes China an economic dragnet that is attracting the third world? Is it because China provides cheaper goods, or it has an economic model that supersedes that of the United States?
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for the opportunity once again, for the good work being done by yourself. I think Ghana-China relationship has been decades now, and going forward you equally realize that we are in a a global competitive market. And equally, we have seen China as one of the strongest economies in the world. But then China is very smart and fast in the sense that they don't want to just assume. They don't want to assume the fact that they are the leading economy in the world. They equally needs to put measures in place to continue being the leading economy in the world. And henceforth, going forward, you realize that they are now looking for comparative advantages and in terms of market structures. And China deem it fit to focus their attention on Africa and looking at Africa in the sense that the market in Africa is so huge, and equally the materials, the raw materials that is needed to boost the economy are also found in Africa. So it's one way demand and one way supply.
So there are demands coming from across the world. There are supplies that are also coming from across the world.
Yes.
But what is so unique about China? And Doc made a reference to the fact that China uses a bait. We aren't saying this is an A-class product, but try it.
Exactly.
After you've tried it, you become enticed to want to go a second time to patronize it. Is it doing better at the economic game than the UK, for example, whose quantum of trade with Africa continues to diminish with the passing decades?
Thank you very much. I think for you to be able to produce and supply, you equally need to study the market and you know what demands are. I think China has been very good in doing that. They studied African's economy and the behavioral patterns, and they really know what we needed, even though most of the things provided are substandard. But I think that they are looking at...
That is quite a bold statement.
Yes.
Chinese products are substandard.
Yes, most of the products coming to Africa,
let me explain
they are
that
substandard. And,
yes, for a reason.
Isn't that an indictment on global trade and free trade, just as you've indicated?
Because of
not really.
availability.
There you go. It is a marketing strategy. It exists everywhere. You look at the target market, and then look at the economic strength of the target market. On the basis of that, you determine the quality of the end product that you would manufacture and make available in that particular market. So it could, let me just cite an example without mentioning brand. It could be a cell phone. All right, cell phone from China to Ghana might be of a relatively low quality, and the same cell phone from China to the United States will have a high quality because the expected price in United States is higher, and therefore the quality would commensurate with the price of the cell phone. If the same amount or the same price is to be visited down to Ghana, it may be difficult for many people to afford. So what do? They would invariably reduce the quality of the product and then make it affordable to the people. So the substandard is relative. It is because most of the people within the target market in Africa cannot afford relatively high priced items, and therefore you reduce the quality to suit what they are.
It boils down to the purchasing power of the targeted market.
Absolutely, that is what it is. So if he may continue, when he completes, I will come in and then explain why China is so focused on Africa.
Doc, some people may take umbrage or offense at the fact that whatever we go for an insert. His Excellency the President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo made an overture to China and the rest of the world about our readiness to do further business. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly.
President Akufo-Addo's trip to China is of two purposes. First, to explore opportunities to deepen economic cooperation between Ghana and China, and secondly, to attend the Forum for Africa-China Cooperation, FOCAC 2018. To President Akufo-Addo, Ghana has a lot to learn from the Chinese to become an African lion. The Chinese were all prepared for President Akufo-Addo's visit. They gave a rendition of his favorite song, Oye, to welcome him. The two presidents witnessed the signing of 8 agreements that define the ambit of Chinese cooperation with Ghana. Principal amongst them was a $2 billion Sino-Shore Framework Agreement, which will enable Sino Hydro Corporation, a subsidiary of Power China, to finance and participate in major infrastructure projects. The Chinese government is to embark on the construction of 1,000 boreholes across parts of Ghana, which will help in ensuring access to potable water. The Chinese president also assured Ghana of China's commitment to financing the construction of the Jamestown Fishing Port Complex, the expansion of the Cape Coast Sports Stadium, the commencement of the Phase 2 expansion project of the University of Health and Allied Sciences in Ho, and the construction of a new cocoa processing facility in line with President Akufo-Addo's vision of adding value to Ghana's raw materials. President Akufo-Addo also used the platform to ask the Chinese government to intensify its investments in Ghana while boosting their already cordial relations.
Ghana has been, indeed, ever since the early days of diplomatic relations between us, a very, very firm friend of China. Indeed, was my predecessor after the relationship was established by President Nkrumah with Mao Zedong and Premier Chou Enlai. Was my predecessor as president, MPP President John Kufuor, who voted the famous historic vote for China's admission into the Security Council. And since then, we have been a very firm advocate of the One China policy. We've never deviated, and we continue to be a strong, strong supporter of the One China policy. The cooperation between our two countries has been excellent. And for the last 3 years, China is now, in fact, the largest trading partner of Ghana. We've displaced our old colonial associations in terms of economic cooperation and development. And we're very grateful for this turn of events. In fact, we're looking to intensify and deepen that cooperation.
The Chinese president endorsed President Akufo-Addo's vision of Ghana Beyond Aid, urging him to be resolute in realizing this vision not only for Ghana but also for the entire African continent.
Roundtable meeting of presidents and heads of state at the 3rd summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation (FOCAC) in Beijing, China, afforded the African leaders the chance to explain what they are doing to improve their various economies. With China being the largest trading partner to Ghana and majority of countries in Africa, President Akufo-Addo noted that the continent is grateful for China's support to the African people. He said Ghana is inspired by the Chinese model, which has lifted many people out of poverty. President Akufo-Addo also drew attention to the fact that Ghana is implementing an industrialization policy of one district, one factory, something similar to the Chinese economic model. Another similar economic strategy in Ghana is a program called Planting for Food and Jobs, which comes with an increase in agricultural productivity. With the World Bank projecting that 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies this year are in Africa, of which Ghana is one, President Akufo-Addo indicated the continent is rich in natural resources and also in possession of nearly 30% of the Earth's remaining mineral resources. He remarked that China and Africa recognize that a win-win situation for their respective peoples is a desired outcome. President Akufo-Addo told his colleague president that he is determined to ensure that this new era of Ghana-China and Africa-China relations will reaffirm the principles of solidarity, mutual trust and respect, which have anchored those relations and would help Africa deliver progress and prosperity for all.
You're welcome back. You are still tuned into the issues with me, Irvadi Ibrahim. We have still in the studio Dr. Ebenezer Ashley and then Reverend Dr. Samuel Wolanyo Mensah. And we broke up on an interesting note of substandard or not substandard. Yes. But where from this latter-day appetite to engage Africa from China?
Thank you very much. A very good question. Now, this is one bit of it, which actually triggers the relationship in recent times. If you have the end product, you look out for the target market. Now, as we speak, if you look at the world's first 30 youngest countries, out of the 30, 28 are from Africa. The other 2 are Afghanistan and East Timor. So if you look at it, the world's median age as we speak is 29 years, 6 months. Now Niger has a median age of 14 years, 8 months. So Niger has exactly half the world's median age. And so the world's youngest country or population in the world is Niger now. Second is Uganda with 19 years. Chad comes in third. You know, we have the likes of Somalia, Gambia, all of them. Burkina Faso is 10th youngest country in the world. Nigeria is 16th. Ghana doesn't come within the first 30. Madagascar is the 30th youngest population in the world.
Yes.
So if you look at this, the fact that the first 30, only those who come in at number 14, Afghanistan, and then East Timor around number 23. The rest are all African countries. So this sends a clear message that if you have earned produce and you're looking for the target market, then this is the place to go. Not only that, China has the aging population now, and therefore if you should establish your factories within the African countries, you are assured of a long labor serving in your company. You could have people who could serve for over 30 years before going on retirement, especially if the median age is about 20 years.
Yes,
you know, so this is the reason why China is so focused on Africa. And fortunately, as Reverend mentioned earlier, with the behavioral factors, you see, China shares many common cultural features and characteristics with African countries, and it makes it easier for them to adapt to the environment when they come in. And this is also giving them an edge over their competitors.
Okay.
You know, so
that's quite a good point.
Yeah.
I think we'll delve into the 50 billion bond.
Okay.
But has the relationship with China been all rosy? It's supposed, of course, to be symbiotic. It's going to be a quid pro quo kind of relationship. But has it all been good, especially in the face of Galamsey and Chinese nationals being accused of being those carrying out those acts?
It's true, and I think China had good intents as far as transacting the international business Ghana is concerned. But going forward, you realize that some few Chinese equally misbehave in the areas of Galamsey. But it's quite good to hear their president telling President Akufo-Addo to equally punish any Chinese found in the Galamsey business in Ghana. And I think that is a statement. And going forward, I think China had a lot of interest in Africa, and more especially Ghana, because of our peaceful coexistence. And not that Ghana is peaceful, like peaceful coexistence. You can see that all the various religions are living in that harmony. So once that before a business strife, there must be peace, because you can't achieve a progress without peace. So that, I think, the peace is what is marketing Ghana now. And going beyond that, you equally realize that we don't produce. So we consume more than we produce. So there is that vacuum that needs to be filled. And I think China's deem it necessary, looking at their relationship with Africa and Ghana for a very long time. And I think they are taking advantage of that.
Would you, Doc, attribute China's success on this continent to the fact that it offers to give assistance, but then it doesn't interfere in your domestic political issues? Is that a selling point for China?
I'm happy you've advertised China in this particular way. It is a clear cut indication. You realize their focus is about selling my product. You know, so it goes with the local adage that, well, I come to fetch fire, you know, to set up my fire, but not ostensibly to poke my nose into your soup. And that is exactly, you know, what we can tell from the behavior of China in this particular regard. Their main focus is how to market their produce. And you realize they started by devaluing their currency to make the country attractive to the West for the establishment of factories. And after that, they have the goods, and they're now looking for the market for the goods, you know, and that is actually working out effectively. You asked about the relationship. As we speak, Ghana's largest trading partner for the past 3 years is China. You know, in 2016, the trade between the two countries was estimated at about $5.976 billion US. In last year, it increased to about $6.676 billion. So in percentage terms, it increased to about by about 11.67%. And not only that, you realize the direct investment has also been very attractive. In 2012, it was about 500 million. Last year, it reduced to about 123 million US dollars in terms of foreign direct investment from China. But I wouldn't say it has reduced. There are some factories or businesses that when you establish, it may take a while for a new one to be introduced. So I call these add-ons to the existing ones. Now you talked about quid pro quo, which should in a way strike somewhat a balance between the amount, the figures you mentioned. If last year's trade, for example, was about 6.676 billion, then Ghana's share of the trade should be hovering close to 3 billion. But that wasn't the case. And this is invariably because we still remain an import-led economy. And therefore, the bulk of the transactions between the two countries, was as a result of Ghana importing more into the country. The estimated export from Ghana to China was about 1.85 million US dollars last year, and it's relatively on the low side. But what matters is that we are maintaining a very good relationship between the two countries. What we imported, you realize, were things that were of necessity, some were of luxury, but they help to improve the living standards of the people. But they are not only trading, they are also finding nice way, let me put it mildly, of giving back part of the profits to the Ghanaian society. As we speak, last year, for example, if you look at the University of Health and Allied Sciences at home, the Chinese government provided about $16 million to support the phase 2 of the project. And about $50 million has also been made available to commence the fishing port at Jamestown here in Accra.
Before I move to Doc, I'll ask you, these figures we keep mentioning, some say China is quite generous to Africa. Are they doling out these monies for free? Our Foreign Affairs Ministry was built by the Chinese. The AU headquarters in Addis was built by the Chinese. Are these soft long-term loans, or they are acts of charity to the continent?
Very good. In the case of the Jamestown fishing port, I know that is a loan, and that is a part of it. But the money given to the University of Health and Allied Sciences has not been mentioned as a loan. So it could be its widow's mite. Not only that, we know the Cape Coast Stadium was built for the country by the Chinese government, not at a specified amount that we have to repay at a later date. So they have, in a way, been trying to give back part of what they earn from our transactions to the society. So once again, the Cape Coast Stadium is even part of the current list of memoranda that our president has signed with the Chinese president.
In bilateral and multilateral relations, are there freebies?
Not
necessarily. Don't you think the Chinese are being a bit smart and cunning and making more than we are making out of this relationship?
I think you are making a very good assertion, and I have a very strong reason why Africa always opt for assistance from China. Now, when you compare that to World Bank and IMF, they have strong conditionalities before they release funds. But with that of China, China will invite you, and together you set up the conditionalities. That is the difference. So it makes China's credit facilities more flexible. And so once that you go for their credit facilities, you realize that you equally have some breathing space in the economy to be able to engage other things for economic development. So that is the benefit of facilities from China. And I think China equally looks at the way the Western world normally or sometimes treats African countries in terms of credit facilities, and just trying to take undue advantage of us. And China is saying that, fine, we have intention to get these resources from you, but equally, before we do that, we are equally ready to help you to develop. So I think doing business with China is more relevant to our economy than the other Western countries.
China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council.
Yes.
It's a global giant, and that is teetering on the caps of dislodging the United States of America. Don't you think the Americans will be a bit uneasy about the way Ghana and the rest of Africa continue to engage the Chinese?
A very good one. It's a very good one. And before I come to that, you asked about the freebies. Obviously, what China is offering is not indirectly for free. But as I've mentioned, you could liken it to our small marketing strategies in our country here, by the companies. That's exactly what is happening at the national or global level. China has goods or services to sell. But then before coming in, she has to assess and then find out how to penetrate the market. How do I knock and then get into the door? That is exactly what China is doing. So you have a taste of it, you compare with the other seller, and then you first determine whose good or service tastes better, who is offering me a better price, who is offering me enough time to before I pay, who is allowing me to study and assess, who is allowing me to make contribution to the determinants of the payment. So these are the qualities that make China an exceptional I would say seller in this particular regard. Now with regards to the United States and others, the challenges have already started. If you hear reports of China making unapproved financial gestures to some African countries with complaints being lodged with the IMF, these are all evidence of the fact that people are beginning to be uncomfortable with the rate at which China is penetrating the African market. As I've mentioned, China has more common cultural features with Africa, invariably than the rest of the West, and therefore it is easier for her to come in and adapt to the environment, and that is working to her advantage. Now, with regards to China's becoming an economic superpower, this has been bemoaned in the United States even in the last 5-6 years. It has already been predicted that in the next 5 to 10 years, China would overtake United States as the leading economy in the world. So this is what United States is also guarding jealously against.
Okay, Doc.
Yes.
China has made its president, Xi Jinping, a lifetime president. This guy is going to be president till he dies. Would you reckon the political stability in terms of the choice of a governance system, which is communism and state-centered, would you say that, yes, Africa is democratizing, but then we should, take a look at the possibility of looking at the governance structure in China, for example?
Thank you very much. I think that's a brilliant one. And going forward, you equally realize that China is moving to Africa because China and India sees Africa as close friends than other, the other whites. And in fact, America is not happy with the way China is approaching Africa. And that is a fact. I have close economists in China who we always discuss such issues. But going forward, you also realize that the question that you asked, that China is gradually taking over. And China will never sit down for America to suppress its will and power. And you also realize that in the global competitive market, it's about how you put your strategies to work. Yes, and looking at the governance system, I think Africa, we have adopted democracy, but then the structures that we need to have before implementing the democracy, we don't have enough structures. So the democracy is only favoring the elites and those who are rich in society, in the detriment of the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized in society. So I think the entire governance system needs some form of overhauling so that we see the way forward.
The dividends of democracy include free markets, free trade and all that. But then it seems to be a one-way traffic. finished products can only come from the West and they are dumped in Africa. And the reverse is only our natural resources that are taken there. So can't we have a critical look at democracy and look at what is idiosyncratic and peculiar to us as a continent, this looking at the possibility of veering a bit away from a liberal system?
Thank you. I don't think we'll veer away from liberal system. To answer the question, let me start with this. I've mentioned in a gathering somewhere that when it comes to on the topic on role models, when you have a role model, it is not absolute. It is not necessary to tap into everything about the role model. Every role model is a human being. The only person that is infallible is the Almighty, and any human being is susceptible to some amount of error. And therefore, if you have a role model, you look out for the positives of the role model and tap into it in addition to what you have and be able to move on. You don't copy the role model verbatim or in absolute terms. If you do that, you may walk away with some negatives as well. But the negatives are not what you are interested in. You are interested in building on what the role model has been able to couch for him or herself. What this actually implies is that if the Chinese economy is practicing a type of democracy that is more of a dynasty than democratic, this will not fit into our ideals, and therefore we may not necessarily
in Africa, if you are installed or skinned chief, you remain chief till you die. This idea of Nanado come for 4 years or 8 years, Dramani Mahama come for 4 years or 8 years, doesn't that destabilize the long-term vision that a leader may have?
To a very large extent, to some extent, I would say yes. But that is the way we've decided to go, to maintain the checks and balances that we are looking for. In some cases, the overstay, degenerate into something else. Okay. They have been able to maintain and they are focused. It doesn't mean it will be readily applicable in every aspect of the sphere of life. Now, having said this, what I'm trying to insinuate here is that yes, the Chinese might have a type of governance system that might have ensured stability and accelerated their development, but that obviously may not be accepted among the democratic ideals of those who have upheld the tenets of democracy. Okay. And all I'm saying is, even if you decide to have some amount of economic romance with China, you do not necessarily have to adapt their governance style, which is more of autocracy and dynasty. Okay. You can look at the economic aspect where they are able to manufacture equipment and be able to improve on their goods and services and take it up from there. That would help us a great deal.
And finally on this bit, Dr. Wallonia, before we look into the $50 billion dollar century bond, China is quite averse to corruption, and the price of corruption can be as high as capital punishment. Would you say there is something in there for Africa to learn, that the more you are anti-corruption or anti-corrupt, the better you will do domestically and even export the surplus you have to the rest of the world?
Yes, I think so, and I think Africa, our major problem continue to be corruption, and corruption can be narrowed down to greed, that is selfishness. And if you are not nationalistic in thinking or in planning, and at the end of the day, once that you have access to the country's resources, you think that you can take undue advantage and enrich yourself in the detriment of others. So you realize that for over the years, we lack a development planning, a long-term development planning, and our planning continue to be a political manifesto. And I think that is the very big ground of corruption, because at the end of the day, the politician wants to implement what he thinks is necessary for him going to winning the next election, and they do all manner of things. So I think when you look at China very well, and when you study their governance system, what they are doing now is that they have long-term development plan, 50 years, 60 years. So it doesn't matter who is the president focuses on the long-term development plan. Now in Ghana we have NDPC, National Development Planning Commission, which even gave us the 40-year development plan, I think under Dr.
Nimoy
Thompson. I think the senior minister equally said that they are trying to break it into pieces, 10 years or 7 years or so. You see, when such things happen, sometimes it's a recipe for disaster. So that is where the political parties comes in, and they try to implement their selfish ideas. I'm not saying the current government is doing so, but I think that is a very high grounds for breeding corruption. And so if really we want to fight corruption, even we know very well that corruption is a canker, it's a menace, it's a sickness that we need to fight. But we need to put structures in place. Once these structures, organs and departments and agencies are working very well, then gradually we are fighting corruption.
Doc, His Excellency has this robust economic idea of making us keep paying to the rest of the world, or investors that will be interested in this grand economic scheme for a whole generation, a whole century. And this $50 billion, bond, educate us. What is the net for Ghana? Aren't we mortgaging our future for? Yes.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting question. I realize there have been growing debates on this particular issue. I don't see it as an issue. Let me be emphatic here. The truth is that in the world of finance, in the financial market, in most cases, if an investor wants to lend money to you, in this case I'm talking about to a country, a company, the furthest the investor will be looking to go will be 5 years or 10 years. Should the investor decide to go beyond and think about or consider 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, all the way to 100 years, what it means is that this particular investor has growing confidence in your economy and believes strongly that the legacy, the economic measures that you have set out will make it easier for those generations to be able to pay the debt. And therefore, not every borrower, not every country can get the opportunity to get a century bond. Let me be clear here. Not every country will get the opportunity to get a century bond. It depends on the economic structures that the lender is convinced about and believes strongly that when the time comes due, the payment will be easier. And unfortunately for us, we live in a world that is relatively small, like a small village, not even a global. When you say global village, it can be big. It's in a small village. When you enter, you're a stranger, people can easily tell because you don't belong. But now with the click of a button, because of the advent of technology, people can sit thousands of miles away and be able to find out about your economic initiatives, your economic measures, and tell the direction in which you are going. One renewed measure that is helping this country has to do with the president's decision to revisit the ideals of the first president of the First Republic, that's the late Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. That has to do with the free education. Education is the pivot around which an economy is modeled. If you have decided to make secondary school education compulsory and free, of course, for everyone, the message you're sending out there is that very soon, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, you will have an average population that could read and write, which will make the dissemination of messages, information on development of the economy, the collection and payment of taxes very easier. And therefore, when it is time for repayment of debt, you wouldn't have to sweat to do as we're doing now. The Ghana Revenue Authority last year had to organize quite a number of conferences, symposia to educate people on the benefits of paying taxes. Why? Simply because we have a challenge when it comes to formal education. So the journey we are embarking on when we consolidate...
Tax evasion could be an advertent way of fleecing the system.
That's what I'm saying. But tax evasion...
It has nothing to do with reading and writing.
No. You see, there are two ways. There are some people who would love to pay, but they do not understand why they should pay it.
Okay,
That's different from those who are very crafty and want to evade.
Okay.
You know, that is different.
Yes.
There are many people who do not even understand why they have to pay.
Okay.
But if they have the basic education, you realize there will be more people who would comply than those who would not conform to.
Okay.
You know, so that is one aspect of it. Maybe for time you want to go, I'll come back to it.
Okay, thank you so much. Doc, when you bequeath an estate to your offspring, you want something quite reasonable. For a country whose debt stock is quite overwhelming, is $50 billion not too much?
Thank you very much. I think we even needed more than that, in the sense that when you look at our infrastructure deficits over the years, and I think we are lacking.
It's not like your economy is expansive enough. So the more facilities you put in, or the more office spaces you create, the more you expand as an economy. It is struggling.
Let me come before you continue.
So you think 50 billion is even not enough? We should even go for twice that.
Yes, because you realize that even when you look at the educational sector alone, because we are trying to be able to lay foundation for future generations, and even looking at the education sector alone, you realize that senior high schools are lacking a lot of facilities. And if we want to implement free senior high schools, then we should be able to provide enough facilities. For instance, the dormitories, we need classroom blocks, we need libraries, we need computer laboratories all across the country, and these are capital intensive. Now, we can equally, once that we say we are moving away from aid to trade, then we should be thinking about industrializing the country and be able to support one industry. It's not a 1 million Ghana cedi issue. So if really we want to industrialize, then we need such quantum of money, but then it must be put into proper use. If at the end of the day we don't have value for money, then it becomes a curse. But if it's been put into good use, then it's a blessing. So I think that going forward is just like two of us, we have a land. We have parcel of land in Accra. And you are thinking that until you are able to mobilize, you work and mobilize funds yourself, you will not be able to put something on it. And I went to maybe a commercial bank and had a credit facility from there. And I was able to put up an accommodation facility, maybe a flat. And at the end of the day, I lease it out for 30 years. After 30 years, I'm rich. And after 30 years, you are still there with that same land.
So it is necessary for His Excellency to propose this bold step.
Exactly. It's a strategic planning and strategic thinking. So if you don't see it that way, at the end of the day, you'll be thinking, one additional thing to it is that you realize that as the years goes by, this money, quantum of money that you are saying 50 billion, continue.
Value.
Exactly. And it loses the face value. And even at the end of the 100 years, you as an individual, you can pay that money. Because the money that Dr. Kwame Nkrumah took in building the Akosombo Dam and others, today you alone, you can raise that money. So you see that as the years go by, it loses value. And even look at what happens in ex-President Kufuor's time. At a time, I think the Western world realizes that, okay, you are trying to develop, and the only way we can help you is to write your debts off.
Okay.
And Doc, that is hippie.
We are beginning to wrap up, Doc. The only two other countries that have been this presumptuous have been Argentina and Mexico. But when you look back at how they have fared in the past half a decade or so, they have not done too well. So aren't we learning from a very wrong playbook, so to speak?
Thank you very much. We are not comparing ourselves to those two economies. We're looking higher than those economies. And you mentioned that we already burdened with some debt, and we want to add that to it. Our debt actually is nothing to write home about. If you are to compare with other economies, and as we speak, our debt is about 69.8%. And last year, the debt to GDP ratio is about 69.8%. But if you look at it, the first 10 highest debt to GDP ratios in the world, we do not come anywhere near. Japan leads with about 253%.
But see what Japan does.
That's where I'm coming. That's what we.
Always goes to line the pockets of people.
That is the difference. That is the difference, and that is what we shine away from. That is the new paradigm. I'm happy you made the comparison. You look at Japan, 253%, nobody complains. Why? Because the funds are used for the purposes intended. And therefore, they know no matter how long it tarries, they'll be able to repay. You look at Greece, 179%, Lebanon, 148%. You also come down, Italy, 131.5%. You have our own Cape Verde, 129.2%. Portugal, 126.2%. You know, you have the likes of Mozambique, 120%, Congo Brazzaville, 117.7%, Jamaica, 122.2%, all of them. And Singapore, 112%. When it comes to debt to GDP, it doesn't even end there. You look at Spain, 99%, France, 97%,
so it all
UK,
depends.
that is it. And Zimbabwe is even 77%. You come down to Mauritania, it's 78%.
Yeah, so it depends on what you use
the funds for. So it is not the quantum of debt, but the extent to which you apply the debt to the purpose intended. You know, and we have what you call the canons of good lending. Whenever you go to borrow from the World Bank, IMF, down to the various banks here, you have the canons of good lending. The first one is the purpose of the loan. You know, so you consider what the monies are intended for before they are released. And it tells us that over the years, our various governments have been able to provide very nice words on paper to attract the loan, but the utilization of the funds, you know, becomes very wanting. But that is what we shine away from. The current administration going forward, we are all witness to how the funds are being utilized. And therefore, if we should even get the 50 billion, as I said, is it the future value may be different. If you're able to get it today, we'll be able to apply it to so many projects. And believe you me, we may be able to even raise the money far before or earlier before the 100 years. And the remaining years may even be profitable to us as a country. A typical example, let me cite a common example. Just in his illustration, if you should realize that if you cite a hostel closer to university, you may be able to get students to patronize because accommodation is a challenge. You approach a bank, the bank awards the loan. If you apply the loan to the establishment of the hostel, you realize within 3-4 years you may be able to pay off the loan, and the subsequent years may come as well as a profit. You know,
His Excellency the President used this Chinese platform to unveil what he has on offer. But Doc, it doesn't mean we want all of the $50 billion from China. It was an opportunity for His Excellency to communicate to the rest of the international community. Exactly. What countries do you think are allies to Ghana that can easily buy into this apart from China?
And I think US is interested, and I think UK equally is interested.
No, the UK has become protectionist. It is, shrinking away from its global engagements and commitments. Hence Brexit. So even within its own ecosystem, it doesn't want to engage. And why would the UK be interested in a former colony?
From Brexit, it's coming to the Commonwealth.
Yes.
But so in the Commonwealth, Ghana is a member. So this is where Ghana's interest may be considered.
Okay. So you think the UK is a great economic partner?
Yes. And I think
potential.
Last week we had some India investors into the country, and we took them around. And I think India itself is interested in such issues, and going forward I think it's a brilliant opportunity for us, and we thank the President for marketing Ghana.
In closing, I think I'll take your final comments.
Okay.
Doc mentioned Dr. Nimoy Thompson and the 40-year development plan.
Yes.
It's been whittled down to 7 or 10 years or so. And do you
7
think,
years.
Yes. Do you think anybody would have the appetite to want to continue such a robust economic strategy that His Excellency is proposing 4 years down the line, or 8 years down the line, 6 years down the line?
It is 7 years down the line. As a matter of fact, I have been a proponent of the National Development Plan, so that I have talked about the need for us to uphold the principle of succession plan which in a way buys into the national development plan. And what it basically means is that we should have a structure in place which will serve as a guide to succeeding government, so that we wouldn't always have to come and comb through our minds to determine what has to be done for the nation. If we're able to put it on paper, when you come, you will follow where there is the need for some amount of reform due to advent of modernization. You do that, but you realize integrally you have something to hinge onto, and it will make the development process a little bit easier for all of us. And so I am strongly in favor of the National Development Plan. That is one side. Now, when you narrow it down to the proposal, especially by the current president, of the 7-year, the 7-year, basically, if you look at the idea behind it, it is as if, well, within my tenure of office, I will be able to, I should be able to do it.
Is it about my tenure of office? Because good governance is a continuum. It's not about my tenure of office. It's about...
It's perhaps the choice of words, and it's also based on one common problem we're trying to resolve as a nation. That has to do with ideology. You know, I have maintained that we must shy away from ideology to nationalism, because if you become centrism, you know, upholds conservatism. But if you remain conservative, then it will be difficult for you to adapt into other.
Because in Ghana's development, it's about in our era, in this so-called regime, and in the US, they don't talk that way. It's about the United States of America.
Now we are shying away from that. As a matter of fact, the 7-year development plan is intended not for the NPP per se,
Thank you
but
so much.
as a national development that we could work.
Doc, your final comments. I wish we can do that under 30 seconds.
Yes, I think
how do we continue? How do we ensure sustainability of such a lofty
going forward, looking at succession, we should embrace national policies, and we should do away with a partisan approach to national issues. And if issues like bond and others, I think the experts who comment on it, they should try to educate rather than to politicize and condemn the whole issue.
Thank you so much. All too soon, we've come yet again to the end of another edition of The Issues. And we had in the studios Dr. Ebenezer Ashley, an economist and a financial consultant. Doc, thank you once again for making time.
It is a pleasure.
And we also had Reverend Dr. Samuel Wolanyo Mensah, a chartered economist and a lecturer with Wisconsin University.
Thank you very much.
So much for making time. So we come your way next week with another edition. Stay blessed and keep watching GTV.
I was the first country in